Hi, I'm David Miller, and I'm with Next Generation Assessment, and I'm a co-host of the Web Byte series here with Tammie Cumming. I'm also a professor in research and evaluation methods from the University of Florida, and the director of the School of Human Development and Organizational Studies in Education. And today we're excited because the topic is the evolution of assessment in higher education.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, David. I'm Tammie Cumming. I serve as the Associate Provost for Institutional Effectiveness at Brooklyn College of the City University of New York. It's a huge honor to introduce Linda Suskie, a fellow Hawkeye, and someone who's just made such an impact and been what I would call almost a pioneer in assessment in higher education. Welcome, Linda, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right. Well, we'd love to start with our first question is we just with all your vast experience in assessment, we'd just like to hear about the evolution of assessment that you've witnessed throughout your career. So what changes have you seen in this field that has evolved, and which foundational principles have remained the same in your time in higher education assessment?
Boy, Tammie mentioned that I did my graduate work at the University of Iowa in educational testing and measurement, is what we called it then. Back then, the way we were taught to grade papers was literally to throw them into piles. The A pile, the A minus pile, the B plus pile, the B pile. Maybe after you finish sorting, kind of read through to make sure that the piles were pretty consistent in terms of quality. But that was the extent of guidance. I think one of the great accomplishments of the last quarter century has been the growing use of rubrics to assess student work and student performances in higher education. Wherever we go from here on out, I think rubrics are going to stay with us. Too many people have seen the benefits of it. It's much fairer to students. If you do it right, it actually makes the grading and assessment processes a lot faster. They give you wonderful, actionable information. You can go through and count how many students got each box on the rubric. That gives you real clear data on strengths and improvements. And it's, I think that's one of the best accomplishments that we've had of all the work that we've done on assessment.
Oh, Linda, I'm trying to think back to the days when I first transitioned from ACT, American College Testing, to the CUNY system. And about the time I was coming to CUNY in 2009, AAC&U was working on the general education, the rubrics. I think there's 14 or so of those. I could be wrong. My college adopted 14 of them as a framework for gen ed. So you're right. I mean, people had really understood this idea that having this articulated and organized in a way where people can understand, it's fairer for the students, and it's also much easier for the faculty to use them. And in your history in working with faculty and now as a consultant for higher education assessment, are you seeing people much more open to the idea of using rubrics? At the beginning, I remember people thinking, wait, what's a rubric? What am I doing? Yeah. So what can you speak to regarding that? I think it's getting easier.
I really, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. I think a related accomplishment that we don't give ourselves enough credit for is all the conversations on what our learning outcomes should be, whether it's at the course level or program level or gen ed or institutional co-curricular programs. That I think that's been the second biggest accomplishment, and they fit together because you say, I want my students to develop information literacy skills. Well, how am I going to evaluate how well they've developed information literacy skills? When I look at their library research papers, how am I going to assess them? And that's where the rubric fits in. But then as you work on the rubric, you realize that the learning outcome might not have been quite as clear. People are disagreeing on interpreting the rubric, leads to more conversations. So you put those two pieces together, and I think we're taking a much more thoughtful approach to what we want our students to learn and how we're going to make sure they learn it.
I think that's really a good thing too. The other thing that I think that's really helped, at least that I've seen down here, is the idea that now the accrediting agencies are really spending more and more time talking about, as you've talked about, how they're going to use it. And there's these requirements that we, in fact, talk about. What have we done with the assessment data? Not just that we've collected data, but that we're doing something with it. And I think that's a really exciting development we've also seen.
That's, I think that's the biggest nut that we haven't quite cracked yet. And it's frustrating to me. I think it's a good 10 or 15 years ago, I was hearing George Koo say, we're all sitting on an awful lot of assessment data and we don't know what to do with it. And that's still true 10 or 15 years later. The problem is there's a whole host of reasons why that data isn't getting used. You have to do what I call root cause analysis, which is ask yourselves why. Why is that data sitting and not being used? And then attack whatever that root cause is. And there's easily a dozen or more reasons why it might not be used.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, Linda, because data sitting, on a computer someplace is not helping anybody, even if they went through the process of scoring the student work and everything.
Right.
It's a segue into the discussion of, especially since the pandemic, there'll be one side of the camp that says, look, enrollments are down, we've got to cut our funding, we've got to really watch the budgets. Why should we be investing more in assessment? In my mind, if we're really using data-driven, if we're in a data-driven culture, informing our decisions, we should be using this even more. So how do you talk to people about the return on investment? And, for faculty, even if it's not, money, if it's their effort, their labor, or administration, on how to get the message through. And I know you can probably give an entire day's talk on this or even more, but what would you have advice for people in trying to convince the other parties that this is worth your time and investment?
I don't like the word convincing because it sounds like this is medicine you have to take and it's good for you. But who wants to get that kind of a message? I would much rather provide some incentives, rewards, some carrots that help people intuitively see value in this. Let me give you an example. Right now, a lot of colleges and universities still have a promotion and tenure system that says on paper that it values teaching most, scholarship second, service third. But nobody's really sure how to evaluate teaching. Everybody's uncomfortable. So they really focus on scholarship. I've had faculty say to me, I get this about assessment. I know I really should be looking at the results of my student work and using it to improve my teaching, but I'm on the promotion track. And the only thing they're going to look at is how many journal articles I publish. And every spare minute, I have to work on those research journal articles. I don't have the time to work on my teaching. And as long as I get decent student evaluations, nobody cares if I try to improve my teaching or not. Right there, if we overhauled promotion and teaching so that it valued how much faculty use systematic evidence to understand and improve their teaching, problem solved. It becomes an expectation. That's what we consider great teaching to be, is not that you get good student evals, but you're always looking at the systematic evidence that you collect and using it to understand and improve your teaching. So just what, I mentioned, I think you said there were, a dozen things that we could be doing, but that's a really, really hard fix. I've mentioned that to hundreds of people at hundreds of colleges, and they say, well, we can't do that. Well, it's a shame because the quality of teaching is not as good as it needs to be because we don't have the courage to do that.
Well, we've certainly learned a lot about that through the pandemic, at least within the CUNY system, and taking a look at modes of delivery, if it's asynchronous versus synchronous online, and
Right.
so many different things when everyone was forced to go online. Regarding the promotion and tenure, David, what do you think about that? Do you think that there could be a real change? Because where is that coming from, that view? Is that coming from faculty enforcing that tenure promotion system that's been around for so long? Is it from the admins? What could we do to articulate any sort of advice through this web bite that we're doing right now?
I think it's really a tough one there. I know at UF we struggle with that all the time, and everybody recognizes it as a problem, but nobody's sure where the first step is or how to do it without losing your tenure and promotion kind of validity, if you will. So we're very concerned about that. I think that it is something though that at least that we're seeing at our university now, where we're spending a lot of more time and effort working on teaching and testing and those kinds of programs through general education. And I think there's been a lot of growth in those kinds of concerns. And I think there are select groups that are beginning to do that. And that's sort of at least a beginning. I don't know where the final answer is, but I know we have a long ways to go. But
Well, here's another example, faculty hiring. I've been involved with a lot of faculty hires, and they're often asked to give a teaching demonstration, which is often a lecture, which we now know is the worst way for students to learn. But then when it really comes down to the decision, what hiring committees are really blown away by is the scholarship record. Again, they're not really sure how to evaluate teaching effectiveness. What if we really turned that on its ear and said our top priority is hiring people who are great teachers? And that doesn't mean they're brilliant teachers. It means they're intellectually curious about teaching. They're anxious to learn about the latest pedagogies in their discipline. They're anxious to learn from their students and from assessment results and improve. And once you hire more and more of those kind of people, another way to create a culture in which assessment is a fact of life. Let me throw out one third. I'm throwing out the big elephants in the room, not the easy fixes right now, but the ones that if we could solve these, like I said, problem solved. Third one, I've seen a few institutional leaders who really have the expectation, and it pervades the institution, that if you have an idea, I want to see it backed up by systematic evidence before I'm going to consider it. I see so many places where that's not happening. Oh, 2 students came to me and complained about this. We should do something. Or I had an idea. Let's start this program to help students succeed. Without any data. I actually worked last year with a large program at a large research university. I don't want to give identifying details, but the program was designed to help improve the success of a particular underrepresented cohort. And it was just like that. Oh, I have this idea. Oh, I think this would help. And they're spending thousands and thousands of dollars. They brought me in to do sort of a program review of it. First thing I did was get survey data from Cooperative Institutional Research Program, NESE, Ruffalo, and did a breakout of all students versus the cohort that this program was working on to look for differences in what their needs were, what their expectations, what their plans were. I got budget data and calculated return on investment, which was nothing really fancy, but simply if you spent $1,000 on a program, how many students showed up and participated? If you have only 5 students showing up, that's not a great return on investment. And a lot of other data specific to the program, but you get the idea. Well, it generated a huge number of evidence-informed recommendations on where they should be investing their money, what they should change, what they should strengthen, and things that they really ought to consider stopping because they costed a lot and just really weren't having much of an impact. That's a cultural thing. Clearly, nobody ever told the director of the program, this is how we expect you to do things. And if you want funding, we need to see that kind of evidence. So how many department chairs, how many deans, how many provosts, how many presidents have that clear expectation that you have an idea? Let me show these. Let me see the evidence of student need. Let me show the evidence that this has a shot at working. Just that culture of using systematic evidence to inform decision making. Another big, big elephant in the room.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think I'm at an institution that really actually does value that. So that's in everything. They'll turn it back if you want to launch an idea, proposal, let's do this, let's do that. It's now show me the data before we'll show you the money. So I think we've made a lot of strides that way. So evolutionary, we're using, assessment, we're hearing it all the time. I do think it's being incorporated more than we ever had imagined, a quarter of a century ago, as you mentioned. But one of the things that I've seen, and maybe you can comment on, is at least we try to really train the faculty so that they can understand that assessment is not a standalone thing to be done outside of your curriculum, that it's a part of your curriculum. It's a part of seeing what you can do really well with your students. It can be used in many ways. You're informing your constituencies, but you can take those great successes that you're finding and use those for promotional materials. At my college, we even work with our Office of Communications and school deans to say, look, highlight this. Our students are great at this. Then internally, we'll take a look at some areas that we may consider a challenge that we want to take a look at and have those conversations amongst faculty. And we weren't seeing that, I could say, many years ago when I started at my first college at City Tech. It was just, let me do the assessment and here you go. Then Middle States put into its standards, which most accreditation orgs did. We want to see how you're actually using the data. So as we've had that help actually from accreditation saying, well, it's not just enough to collect it. Let's see how you're using it. I think it's really helped, but the big hurdle that David and I encounter, and you're consulting as well, when we're out in the field giving these talks at a national conference, sometimes there's still a disconnect that faculty don't see this as theirs, as faculty owned. And there's still some old schools of assessment shops out there that are saying, here, use this set of items to assess your students. Hire these external raters to tell us how we're doing. David, before Linda, responds to that, did you want to add anything to, since I'm kind of restating what we state when we go out for our presentations so we can get her feedback?
No, I think those are great points. I think that it's something that we're seeing at some institutions, but clearly it's not a thing that we're seeing everywhere. And that's really a change that needs to happen.
Here's a question I would throw out to just about everybody. If the accreditation, if your accreditor dropped their assessment requirement, what would assessment look like if you were just doing it for yourselves to understand and improve the quality of teaching and learning? What kind of a process would you design? And the great majority of accreditors, that's what they want. A few specialized accreditors need your students to pass a particular exam or something, but the regionals, that's what they want. And I worry that we design a process to get the accreditor off our back rather than design a process that's really useful to us. Giving faculty the data that they're really interested in, giving it in a format that they can quickly understand it, what it means, and in that way make it useful. A lot of times I see processes designed to get things uploaded into this big complicated system that helps whoever is generating the report to the accreditor. That's not your audience. Right. That person should instead be saying, what can I do to make your job easier? We spend too much time on assessment. We spend more time on assessment than we do talking about teaching and learning. And that's really what this should be all about. And I blame accreditors partly for that, because their standards talk about assessment, but don't really, they say something about teaching excellence, but they really don't have a clear expectation that institutions use systematic evidence of student learning to understand and improve student learning. They don't really focus on that part. It's kind of implicit in there. It doesn't jump out at you the way that assessment does. So, a lot of schools I work with at this point, I see the really rigid processes that have been put in place, and I say, you've been doing this for a long time. It's time to break the rules. If you've got that fancy assessment information management system and it's just not working for one program, tell them they don't have to put data in the system. Exactly. Have them develop their own, tell their story in their own language about what they're doing, it formatted in a way that's helpful for them. look at the cost benefit of each assessment you've conducted. Spend hours and hours doing this one assessment, and it's really not telling you anything new. Stop doing it. Do something else. If your students are doing great at, say, quantitative skills, great. Maybe put that one on a back burner. And if their information literacy skills aren't that good, make that the focus of your assessments. Don't lock yourself into a rigid schedule where you're doing the same thing every 3 years, no matter how good or how bad the results are. Really talk about how, what can we change the process, customize it, make it more useful for each faculty member in each program.
Such great advice, Linda. And at Brooklyn College, we're extremely faculty governance is strong, as it should be. Faculty claim their right to the curriculum, and it is theirs. And we came in, my colleague and I, and we just did a restart of assessment. We said, keep it simple. Keep it simple, simple, simple. If it's not valuable to you, it's not valuable to me. So let's look at what you're already doing, what's working, because they do care. They want their programs to be, producing excellent students. They want the employers to be excited about hiring our grads. I think that's really all that it's about. So when you were asking the question, would we still do assessment if it wasn't part of accreditation? I like to think that we would, because people realize you have to do that to keep your programs where they need to be, current and strong. But David, last word on this one, and we probably are close to running out of time, but really great discussion.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. The usefulness of it's really important. I went to a meeting recently with our own program, and the person who filled out the form for the accreditation this year says, well, and he almost was questioning whether or not this was a good thing. He said, all I did was fill it in with things we're already doing. And I said, well, if those are useful, that's the thing to put in there. You don't always have to create brand new things. You don't always have to use the same things, though. You have to do the things that are useful. So if you have useful things, report them. And that's really, I think the flip side of that as well is that sometimes we're doing very useful things and they're not recognized because they don't fit the assessment formats that everybody thinks they should.
Right.
So.
I mean, I started out talking about rubrics, but rubrics are not for everyone. And, do we have a system that lets people report assessment gains with some tool other than a rubric? Let me throw out one other kind of elephant out there, which is, Tammie, I think you opened up by saying how busy everybody has been, how stressed with the pandemic and everything else that's gone on. Do we really, a concern I hear from a lot of people is, yeah, this sounds good, but I just don't have time. I'm really busy teaching. I had to move stuff online. I'm dealing with students who have more trouble than, problems than ever before. They need, support. I'm just really, really, yeah, I'd like to do it. Help me find the time to do it. And we talked in general terms about keeping the assessment process simple, and this might be a conversation for another time, is in real practical terms, what can we do to maybe get other things off of faculty plates? If you say to faculty, we need to do assessment on top of everything else we've already told you that you need to be doing, basically what we're saying is assessment is the least important. You still have to keep all those other things that they must be more important. We need to reframe that if assessment is so important, then what is going to come off of their plates to make time for assessment?
Yeah, good way of thinking of it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. Thank you for taking your time, and we'll see you, I'm sure, in one of our conferences.
Sure. Thanks again for inviting me. This was fun.
All right. Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Bye.